welcome to the Salty Witches podcast. I am your host for this episode, Austin. It is a little stormy here in Utah, and Mike did a little bit of a one off, so I'm going to go ahead and do a one off. And yeah, so today, what I'm going to be talking about is just some stuff that I have personally seen and some of my own personal interests. As we all know, we are in a election. As a matter of fact, the day I'm recording this is November 5th. Remember the 5th of November, you know. So get out and vote. Hopefully you've already voted. As I'm doing this today, I have also um, been doing some of my own personal work. And so today I'm going to talk about the importance of accountability in your craft, your spiritual journey, whatever that is for you. This can be everything from the dreaded shadow work to admitting when you're wrong, um, all those types of things. So, first, I'm going to start off by saying thank you so much, Saltines, for continuing to listen to us, watch us, and engage with us. It means so much because our entire purpose here is to help teach, to guide, to heal. Scout agrees. He's going to come hang out with me. Um, and to provide reliable information. And if there's something that I feel is really lacking in the world of witchcraft, spirituality, magic, all those things, it's a lack of accountability on practitioners, myself included, when it comes to our actions. The ego is something that is innate in all of us. All of us have an ego. That's just what it is. The ego is what tells us um, that's what tells us this is what you do, this is what you're good at, this is what you know. And sometimes that ego can get a little out of hand. And when that ego gets out of hand, um, it's funny how spirits, the universe, your own personal guide, your higher self, whatever you want to call it, steps in to check you. And so I'm going to take today's opportunity to talk a little bit about my journey with that and how I, a traditional magical practitioner, a witch, sorcerer, root worker, whatever you want to call me, whatever label you think I fit into, how that has affected my spiritual journey for both good and bad, and sometimes neutral. Okay, so here we go. This was spurred by my therapy sessions that I have been going to. For those of you who are unaware, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be vulnerable right now. Okay. For those of you who are unaware, I have just a little bit, just a handful of mental illnesses. And those mental illnesses are not something that I am necessarily ashamed of. I mean, obviously, I'm not like proud of them, but they're not something that I'm ashamed of, and they're not something I feel I need to hide. However, as a kid growing up in a highly religious, highly conservative state, those were things that I was taught to be ashamed of. Those were things that I was taught were not normal. And there are certain ways that a man or woman or whatever label that society wanted to put on us is supposed to act. You know, as a kid, I was taught that boys are supposed to be rough and tumble and women were supposed to be soft and squishy. And the more and more that I have gone through life, particularly um, as a gay man, I have seen that not only as gay men do we have a tendency to gravitate towards women because we feel safer around them, I've noticed that we tend to develop some of those traits that is locked in with toxic femininity, just like there's toxic masculinity, right? Anything can be toxic in too many doses. If you take too much of XYZ, then it can create toxicity in your body. And there's no difference therein. And so I'm going to talk about the needing to balance and find those boundaries around our spiritual practices and those who we connect with, and how we can keep those boundaries clear and concise without going to extremes. And so I'm going to start with I have ADHD. specifically severe inattentive ADHD. And I hear a lot of people, they come into the shop, that, my students, um, listeners on the podcast, friends of mine, who struggle with ADHD. And the first thing that happens when we start talking about mental illness in a spiritual capacity, is automatically meds are bad. Meds are bad. And I used to be on that train. I used to be on that, like, no, if it numbs my side, or if it numbs my energy field, or if it makes it so I'm unaware, then it's not good. But here's my question to most people, because I have my own experience. Remember that with the ADHD brain, we are intaking so much information all the time, and um, it takes us time to process it. The problem is like, when we take in that information and we find that new dopamine fix, um, that then takes priority. And because that takes priority, what we just took in is put on the back burner and is left either half unfinished, half unintegrated, half realized, half acknowledged. And that's not a good practice for us as spiritual practitioners. Part of a spiritual practice that I think is extremely important is the need and desire for being present, mindfulness, if you will. And so, as I was saying, and I was doing my work and talking with my therapist, it led us down the discussion, um, this discussion around, oh, what was it called? I want to say delayed response or delayed processing, but that's not what she called it. Let me see here. Now, remember, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I don't, but these are just some terms that I was like, oh, okay, and I can relate that. Ambiguous, ambiguous loss is what she referred to, where we are just receiving so much information all the time that there's no way for us to actually have the time to process it. And so when we start doing the things we need to do to process that, both on a mundane level, spiritual level, physical level, it it becomes overwhelming. It becomes insanely overwhelming, because then you're looking back on things and you're going, "Oh my God, did I really do that? Oh my God, how did I get it? What is this?" And you start to belittle yourself, and you start to turn yourself into your own worst enemy. And I'm here to say that for the majority of people out there who are struggling with mental illness and ADHD, we are not bad people. You are not a bad person. And it doesn't make you a bad witch. It doesn't make you a bad magical practitioner, light worker, shadow walker, whatever you want to call yourself, whatever label you adhere to. It doesn't make you bad at that. But what does create a blockage or a plateau in your spiritual growth is being unable or unwilling to actually look at those things and accept the responsibility you have and go through the process to actually mindfully, actively shift those things and create those new pathways. I hear a lot of people talk about how witchcraft and magic is just spicy psychology. And I would dare to say that, yes, most forms of witchcraft or magic are some sort of spicy psychology. By putting yourself in a present mindset and an affirming mindset, we have a tendency to be able to make our spells pop off quicker, make the magical work pop off quicker, so on and so forth. And so, because of that, what we end up doing is we almost disconnect from the very real implications of our physical mundane actions. And in doing so, we are then left to just sit and wonder what the hell happened. And so, as we do this, and as you are going down your path and you hit that plateau and you don't know what to do, I, instead of reaching for the next dopamine fix, though I know how tempting it is, instead of reaching for that new shiny thing, maybe instead take a moment, take a beat, and actually go back. Allow yourself to actually go back and and observe, not dwell, but observe some of the past actions and past things that have created undue stress or imbalance in your life. And in doing so, you might find that the plateau you're hitting is cyclical in nature. And if we can break that cycle, we can truly grow. My favorite thing about being able to talk about this so openly is that I know that I'm not the only one out there who struggles with this. I know that I'm not the only one who has jumped from one tradition to another, seeking truth and seeking answers. But in the last several months, upon reflection, what I've really seen is this ability that we have to completely disconnect from those things. And it's like those things don't hold any power over us anymore. But we still have to grieve and move past them and heal and integrate. So this is all to preface or to just kind of set things up. So I'm going to talk about witchcraft and ADHD today. Witchcraft and ADHD, I find, work really well together if you can find your perfect balance of go-getterness that ADHD people have and sit with it and digest. As someone with ADHD, one of my favorite things that I can do is that I intake a lot of information all at once. What I hate about that is that I cannot process it all at once. And that ends up making us struggle so hard when it comes to reading books, when it comes to trying to do path workings, journey work, sitting at our altar and just being open and willing to receive. And when we can find that balance, it helps us push past that plateau. So we're not just looking for the next best thing. It was very interesting that this is the subject that I wanted to talk about because I've been seeing in groups that I'm a part of on Facebook, social media crew, and I've been seeing a lot of people fall back onto lazy witchcraft tips. And a lot of these people also are have ADHD or say they have ADHD or some other neurospiciness or neurodivergency. And it's not my I don't diagnose. That's not my job, you know. But they just fall back on that as a reasoning as to why they couldn't do the full thing. Um, I hate that. Now, there's a difference between knowing your boundaries and knowing where you're at and what you can take on and what you can't take on, what you should take on, what you shouldn't take on. There's a difference between discernment and straight up just, I really don't want to do the work to make this happen. That includes everything from learning your correspondences more than just lavender, chamomile, and rose and rosemary, and learning your color coordinations and your crystal correspondences and the myths and the folklore and the this and the that. Roxy. So when we get to that point where we are only relying on the bare minimum in our magic, what does that say about us? It doesn't really say much other than we're overwhelmed. And so in those moments, I will fully admit in the past when I'd have people do that, I'm like, it's just, you're doing lazy witchcraft because you're lazy. You literally just don't want to do the work. You don't want to read the book. You don't want to perform the spell. You don't want to actually read the correspondences and do the work to learn. And it was very frustrating for me as a teacher. But in getting the help that I needed, and learning how to navigate these things for myself, it has helped me learn how to assist others in navigating or making suggestions at least. And so In those moments where you're feeling lazy, I encourage you to sit and ask, what about it could you put a little bit more effort into? And I say this near the beginning of the month. Again, it's November 5th. So a lot of people, I'm sure, have already put the cinnamon powder in their hand and blown it either through or across their thresholds. If you're going to do that, don't use salt. Salt's going to neutralize. On top of that, it's not good for your moldings and outside and stuff like that. Just, you know, just try and avoid that. But if you want to use it, that's up to you. It's your practice. So, but cinnamon is good for abundance, and we know that, and so that's why that came through. It's blowing in abundance and prosperity into the home. And people are like, it's so simple and it's so easy, and it's like, okay, well, how can you make that better? Part of witchcraft, part of magic, is taking something like blowing cinnamon through your front door and going, how can I make this even better? How can I make this my own? How can I make this powerful? How can I add my own signature to this? That is witchcraft. Following a spell that was written in a grimoire to the T, that's sorcery, that's magic, that's most definitely a part of validating witchcraft. However, taking those things, an idea, a spell, a concept, a recipe, and going a little bit further into why things are, why this herb, how can I make this work more effectively for me? So, for example, utilizing the cinnamon through the front door. In a month where we know that we're going to have a retrograde, like this month, Mercury is going to go into retrograde. Cinnamon is great, but Mercury does not just rule communication and technology. Mercury also rules business and commerce. So, because of that, we want to do something to help protect the communication, the business, and the commerce of our home. And cinnamon is good for abundance. And a lot of people go, well, it's good for protection and cleansing too. You're right. Cinnamon is a multifaceted spice with multi uses. But to get your herbal components or any of your components in a spell to work appropriately, you don't want to overload them with so much to do. You want to focus on one, maybe two aspects of that plant spirit or that medicine or crystal spirit or whatever you're working with and hone it. Okay. So, yes, let's make a powder. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a powder that you can use to blow into your threshold if that's what you want to do. Cinnamon, abundance. So, as you have that cinnamon, probably already powdered because it's much easier to buy powdered cinnamon than it is to try and take it and grate it or crush it or, you know, powder it yourself. um, I'm very much of the easy route there. If I'm going to be lazy in things, I'm going to go with like pre-made stuff. Easy, right? Work smarter, not harder. Because then I don't have to exert energy trying to grind that cinnamon. And if you get the real cinnamon, the Saint cinnamon, it can be rough to process. Anyway, so as we go through that and you have that cinnamon, you want to give that cinnamon life. Okay. Yes, it's animistic. It already has a life and a spirit of its own, but it's just cinnamon hanging out, chilling, doing its cinnamon thing, bringing abundance, warding off the nasties. It's just kind of doing the all over general thing. However, if we think of it like an employee, or we think of it like or we think of it like that person, or if we think of it like ADHD, where we probably know how to do lots of things, but there's one thing, like we can only focus on one, maybe two things tops. That's what you want to do. So as you get that cinnamon in you and you're adding it to your mortar and pestle or your coffee grinder or whatever you use to blend your herbs, cauldron, what have you, bowl, doesn't matter. And you put it in there. Don't just put it in there. Talk to it. Tell it, you will bring abundance. Wherever you are placed, whoever's hands you are on, abundance will come. Prosperity will be present. It will be safe and it will be protected because it will always be flowing. Be specific with your words and your intentions. When you've done that, you want to give it breath. Now, there are a lot of people who say you need to give it breath, and they go, we want a breath of life. And when we give a breath of life, it is a nice deep belly breath like you would in meditation. You just breathe in deep and you let that energy build up. And as you breathe out, you want to let that energy float and flow around it. The next term you're going to use is going to be basil. Basil has been used in so many different magical traditions, from everything from protection to prosperity to exorcisms, so many things. So again, we have a multifaceted herb. We want basil to focus on the physical monetary protection in this powder. So as you're taking that basil and you're grinding it with the cinnamon, you will work with cinnamon to ensure the protection and prosperity of my house, of my home, of my business. Anyone who walks through this threshold brings in and shares their abundance, and as they leave by incorporating abundance, they spread abundance. Something like that. Something where you're actually allowing it to be taken into the 4 points of the world. The next one you're going to want to work with is mint. Mint is really great. It is mercurial, specifically peppermint is mercurial, and its mercurial energies have a tendency to attract the spirits of Mercury who can be helpful during times of retrograde. So take that, grind that up, and that's its purpose. Attract helpful spirits with clear and concise communication. Work with cinnamon and basil to protect my abundance and my finances, my home, and communication. Okay, great. Now, if you really want to get really cool and down and dirty with this, you're going to take a piece of paper and you're going to put the sigil for Mercury on that paper. Okay, the sigil for Mercury. If I had a pen, do I have a pen? I do have a pen. Do I have a piece of paper? I do have a piece of paper. So the sigil for Mercury, or the symbol, commonly the astrological symbol for Mercury, is crescent, circle, vertical line. That's the symbol for Mercury, okay? What you can do is you can take this, make sure there's no machine cut edges. Okay. And then what you'll do, once you have those torn edges, why torn edges, Austin? In my tradition, it is my belief that the torn edges help set the energy out. It helps free it. And so in utilizing the torn paper, it's going to help release it. But what we're also doing is we're going to burn this to ash. You're going to take that, you're going to burn it, which means you're going to add fire. Okay. Fire is transformative in nature. It is transmutation. It is power. It is vitality. It is warmth. Remember, fire can burn, but fire can also cook our meals. So as you take this and you talk to it and you give it life and breath and you talk about its purposes to help with Mercury retrograde. And I do believe the retrograde symbol is one of these two. I think it's this one. Um, um, you're working with the energies of Mercury to balance and stabilize. And so as you burn that paper and you let that ash drop into that powdered mixture, you'll then grind it together and you'll mix it. Then you can blow it across your threshold. I wouldn't do that because that seems like a lot of mess, personally. So instead, what I would do is I'd put that in my shoes or put some underneath my floor mat. I would dust my hands with it before a reader shift or before going to work. I would use it to dress orange candles. Orange is good for Mercury in retrograde, especially orange, white, and yellow, because these colors can help balance and stabilize the energies that are feeling a little clusterfucky during Mercury in retrograde. Okay. But everything has a purpose. And if you can allow yourself to slow down and figure that purpose out, Your spells are going to be very locked. They're going to be very, very direct, very streamlined. Now, if you're not the type of person who wants to blow cinnamon across their threshold, you can do the same thing. You can do the same thing, but instead of burning the paper, you're going to use water. But water is not associated with prosperity. Water flows. Okay. And if we're working with the element and spirit of water as opposed to fire, then we are going to see the ebb and the flow of that money, but it's going to be consistent. It's never going to become stagnant. It's always going to be good. And so you'll take your water, you'll boil it, you'll put your herbs in a bowl, you'll pour the water over it. You want to get yourself some orange blossom water for this. You can also use orange blossom cologne. And once it's poured over that, and you've activated those herbs and you put that orange blossom water in, but you've also activated for security, financial abundance, prosperity, etc., 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 then you will let that sit and you'll let it cool and you've created a wash effectively. By utilizing this wash, you do want to let the herbs actually kind of dry on the outside of your door. And you wipe down your threshold. You wipe down and wash and mop your front step, your front stoop, and let those herbs sit there and dry. If you really want to make it super traditional, you can add a little bit of sugar to it. I don't want to do that because for some reason, where I live, ants are everywhere. You can add a little bit of honey. The honey can actually act as a binder. So to make this energy bind and attract to you, you can also add some rum if you want. You could add Florida water. There's a whole different things to it, but you want those herbs to sit. And the reason you want those herbs to sit on the threshold is because they're going to soak and mark that threshold with their power and with their ability. Then you don't need to worry about it. You know, it sets, it forgets, and it's good. And a wash is really easy. So the purpose of talking about this is that, well, yeah, going across your threshold is lazy. Well, it's holding intentions in your mind and your heart. And a lot of people are calling that a lazy witchcraft tip. I challenge you to take some of those things that you would consider lazy and see what you can do to shift them and make them your own. Um, yeah, I think that's a really good focus and what I would encourage everyone to do. Now, in continuing along this path about owning up to our own things as magical practitioners, that also means that we need to own up to realizing when we are either in the wrong and knowing that if we know we're in the right, we need to allow ourselves to be humble about it and we just need to let things happen. Something that I've been struggling a lot with lately is leading a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Remember, if you are considering yourself a lazy witch and you have all this knowledge, you're the only person who can utilize it. And so if you're going to utilize that, do it and own it and don't make a big deal out of it. That is something that I struggle with consistently. I do have a tendency to be a little bit of a performer. I have a tendency to like to be the center of attention. Thank you, 3 placements or 4 or 5 placements, however many placements I have in Leo. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know, especially in public ritual. Public ritual requires a level of performance. But sometimes performative witchcraft is not anything other than Shakespeare. And when we are doing performative witchcraft, we need to remember that there is always a certain level of performance to our craft, you know, uh, taking and anointing your candle, rolling it in the herbs, loading it, dressing it, whatever, making your spell jars and layering it. There is a level of performance there, but who are you performing for? We need to remember that witchcraft is personal, magic is personal, spiritual practice is personal. And so when you're working on your spells and you're working on your magic and you find yourself struggling because you're constantly comparing yourself to other people, you need to ask yourself, who am I doing this for? Who am I performing for? What is the purpose? And if you can allow yourself to work through a little bit of that shadow, a little bit of that um, well, if I do this, this person's going to think this, and da 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 da, and so I need to do it the way that they would do it. Instead of thinking that way, maybe I'm the only one who thinks that way. I don't know. If you think that way, drop it in the comments or message us. But that feeling of like I have to do it this particular way because if I don't, this person's going to think less of me or they're going to judge me. Your magic, your practice is not for other people. It's for you. Sure, you might do work for other people. If you're a professional practitioner like myself, yeah, I do work for other people, of course. But I'm still going to do that work for other people the way I would do it. And I see this a lot with clients who come from particular backgrounds. I have a lot of clients who are or have been parts of ATRs. And so when they have immigrated over from Nigeria or Africa or even from Spain or other places, they're so used to certain practitioners doing things a certain way that when I go, you need to do a cleansing bath, here are the herbs, here's the instructions, they look at me like I'm crazy because they don't think they can do it. I've already prayed over and activated the herbs. I've already done all that. I just don't want to do the bathing part for you. You need to do that yourself. And so I have to remember in those moments because I'm like, I could, but then I'm like, no, no. In those moments, we function the way that we need to function. And that is how your magic is going to be true. That's how you're going to take your magic from seeing kind of sort of results to holy fuck results. Okay. It's not how many books you've read. It's not how many classes you've taken, though these things can help assist us in learning where we're at on our path, what we like, what we do, what we feel good about. Most definitely, they can help. However, in the end, the tools and the information you have received from books, from teachers, from the internet, from your cards, it's all about how you process it and intake it. So if you read, I'm just going to use an example. Let's say you just read Lilith Dorsey's Tarot Every Which Way. Awesome book. I'm rereading it. It's great. I think any practitioner who loves tarot should read this book. It it is an in-depth guide on the magical correspondences of the tarot cards, and it's like major arcana, minor arcana, all that. There's recipes, and when I say recipes, I'm not talking just magical oil recipes. I'm also talking like there is a like deviled egg recipe in there that is just it looks really scrumptious, and I'm gonna have to try it. But I found myself as I was reading it last night asking myself why. Why these particular magical components, knowing what I know about them, why these for this card? And so I allowed myself to kind of go down that rabbit hole. Those are the healthy kind of rabbit holes that you get to go down in witchcraft. Those are the healthy types of rabbit holes you get to go down in magic, is the why. And if the why doesn't fit what you're vibing with, then you need to figure out how those components work. So if we're going to be utilizing frankincense and myrrh, right? What is their purpose? We know that myrrh is associated with the dead. It's kind of fiery. It's burned in mourning rituals, scrying rituals, rituals and rites to honor darker goddesses and gods, the underworld. Frankincense is solar. It's associated with the sun. It's associated with fire, life, benevolence. And so when we're working with those two things, we need to know why we're working with them. And I find that's what a lot of people get caught up on is the why. But then they don't go further because the why has to be someone else's explanation instead of figuring out why that person chose to do it this way. Now, how can I utilize these things in my way? I hope that makes sense. Um, so, in your witchcraft practice, if you find that you're struggling with these types of things, it's always good to take a step back and get back to your basics. Okay. If you are the type of person who loves working with herbs and you want to expand your herbal knowledge, get some herbal books, do some research. If you're the type of person who loves working with incense, who loves working with water, fire, candles, try your hand at making them. research how to make candles. And when I say research, I don't mean just the first article that pops up on Google. I'm talking like experiment. Part of witchcraft and magic is the experimentation phase. That is how you learn what your magic touch, for lack of a better term, is. It wasn't until I started making incense for the shop that I realized that's kind of my jam. That's like my point. Like, that's what I like to do. That's what I'm really good at. Someone can give me an idea or a thought process, and I can kind of go down this ADHD magical awesome rabbit hole of, okay, well, utilizing my knowledge of herbal components and botanical components and scents and structure, how can I make this magical and what would its purpose be and how could they utilize it this way? I love doing that. Not a lot of people love doing that. Some people want to learn how to do that, and I can gladly say that I would love to teach you. The problem is that you're not going to do it the same way I would. I can teach you the ways that I figure it out, and hopefully those tools work for you, but you're still not going to do it the same way I do. So you want to always keep that in mind when you're learning from other people, whether that is a mentor, whether that is your favorite content creator, whether that is your favorite author. Always know that as much as you vibe with them, it is about finding your why. Find your why. Find your reason. Find your focus. If a spell calls for lavender and you absolutely hate lavender, what's the purpose of lavender in that spell? And if the practitioner does not give you the purpose of that, then it's up to you to figure out what its purpose in that spell is. That is one thing that I am finding a lot of lately is that people are constructing things or going just ham off of, well, this herb because this. Okay, great. We all know roses are good for love. Do we also know that roses are good for healing? Do we also know that roses are good for protection? Did you know that you could use roses in baneful magic because of their thorns? Yes, you could even utilize the flower in baneful magic to cause someone's love to wilt. So you have these things, and it's all about going down and taking that baseline of knowledge, that base correspondence that you have, and going deeper. Go deeper. Don't go too deep. Sometimes people go really, 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 really deep and then they get lost and then it's a hard time getting back out. So just go a little deeper, just a little bit. Go a little deeper and acclimatize to that deeper water and how that feels. And then you can go a little deeper later. But remember, you can put something on the shelf and come back to it later in witchcraft. It's okay. Unless that spell or that working you're working with needs to be done a particular way for a particular purpose. And again, chances are if you are the one who wrote that spell, you're the one who gets called the shots there, then okay. But when it comes down to it, finding your connections and the plant spirits and the crystal spirits that work best for you and you really connect with are great. This leads me to wanting to talk about titles. With the rise of Agatha All Along, which is a lovely show. I love Agatha All Along. Love Catherine Hahn. Love Patti LuPone. Aubrey Plaza. Love them all. Okay, I think they did a great job. With the rise of Agatha all along, I've seen a resurgence of labels for witches: green witch, protection witch, fire witch, divination witch, beauty witch, glamour witch, sex witch, light witch, tarot witch, dark witch, white witch, black witch, red witch, yellow witch, blue witch, whatever. So many different types of witches. Remember that when you put a label on yourself, labels are limiting. Now, I'm not saying that if you identify as a green witch, that you should stop identifying as one. Not at all. Not at all. 100% you want to identify as a green witch, that's your band. That's your jam. Do it. I guarantee though that if you're a green witch, you're still using candles, right? You're still probably utilizing moon phases. You're still probably utilizing divination methods. Um, so you're not just a green witch. Witchcraft and magic is a multifaceted subject. It's a multifaceted practice. And so to try and label what one thing is and what another thing is gets really convoluted sometimes. Because if we look at a root worker is not going to call themselves a green witch, but a green witch is going to look at a root worker and go, okay, well, you're a green witch. But that root worker is going to look at that green witch and go, no, I'm a root worker. And there's going to be this weird disconnect. Labels are limiting, and they have a tendency to not only limit, sorry, Roxy's making a funny noise. They have a tendency not only to limit what types of magic you think you're able to practice, but they also have a tendency to limit what types of mentors and community you have around. So if you are labeling yourself, that's great. You maintain that label for yourself, but try it. Please don't just back yourself into a corner and say, well, I'm a death witch, so I only work with these things. Okay. But death and life go hand in hand. There is a dichotomy when it comes to magic and witchcraft around the balance of light and dark, life and death, all these things. There's a dichotomy there. And it's important for us to remember that we are constantly changing and evolving individuals, at least we should be, especially in our craft. And though we have one thing that we know works 100% well for us, that might change, and that's okay. So I encourage each and every one of you to take a moment, take a beat, and just allow yourself to step back and go, okay, let's take inventory of my practice. Let's take inventory of what I really am connected with. Let's take inventory of these things. And so, in doing so, it will kind of sort of give you a roadmap. It will give you a roadmap or a focus on excuse me, what to do next, where to go next, what to hone in on. Okay. And when I say take inventory, this can be both physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, all of that. What parts of your practice are fulfilling you lately? If you are not feeling any fulfillment from your practice, why? And sit with that for a moment. Why? Could it be because spirits aren't responding to you anymore? And so now you have to go find a whole new group of spirits? Or, more likely, is it because you have been so dedicated and so disciplined in your practice at your level that you're just used to it now? We all have that experience. We all have that person who does not wear deodorant, who thinks that they can get away with it, but everyone around them can smell it, but they don't think they smell. As much as I don't want to say witchcraft and magic are the same thing, they're the same thing. When you're doing the work and you're making leaps and bounds and strides and you're growing and you're healing and you're doing your personal work in the integration, it it becomes very familiar and it becomes very comfortable. And it's in those moments that we can accept that comfort and we can rejoice in it, or we can look at that comfort and see, maybe it's time to change something. Maybe it's time for me to switch up my daily routine. Are you the type of person who sits at their altar every day or at an altar every day, lights a candle and prays fervently? Or are you the type of person who walks by their altar in the morning and goes, hey guys, and goes forward? Either one of those could benefit from learning a lesson from one another. The person who's extremely regimented and rudimented and structured and disciplined could probably do with taking a minute and actually having fun with their practice. Whereas the person who has too much fun with their practice could actually benefit from sitting down and actually organizing and doing some more structured work. And that's not a permanent thing. Permanency is not a thing, I think, in witchcraft. I will say there are certain things that are permanent, obviously, but energy shifts, fate shifts, destiny shifts, all these things shift and change, and we should be able to shift and change with them. And if we meet it with acceptance, acknowledgement, presentness, and mindfulness, we have the ability to change and evolve and heal and migrate appropriately. Yeah. That being said, what I would like you to do is I would like you to take a moment in the next week or so. And in those moments where you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling like you're not doing enough, when you're feeling like you're doing too much, take a moment, take a breath, put your hands over your heart and breathe and acknowledge that breathing, the elevation of the chest, the descension of the chest, the expansion of the belly, the the contraction of the belly, the movement of the air past your nostrils. Take a moment and breathe and ask your body and ask your spirit, what am I feeling? I know this is probably a little too woo-woo-y and light workery for a lot of people that are used to my normal fire and just fucking do it, you know. And I still do have those moments with some students. There are some times where I'm like, no, you just need to do the thing, because if you do the thing the way I wrote it, you're gonna get a result. I know, I know you will, you know. Um, but when we're navigating changes in our spiritual practice, when we're navigating growth, when we're navigating plateaus and stagnancy, um, the way to remedy that or to bring a resolution to that is quite honestly to do exactly what you're doing. Just do it with awareness. Take a moment and sit and be aware of how you're feeling. You know, if you're doing a daily devotional rite, sit, take some more time. What are you feeling? Are you engaged? Are you not engaged? What can you do to make yourself more engaged? Um, and don't just hop ship because it's no longer fun and it's no longer giving you the dopamine and it's no longer pretty shiny, sparkly, and new. Instead, it is worn and weathered, and that's a good thing. The problem is that people want the deep old ancient magics, but they're always constantly going for the newest thing. You can't you can have both, but you need to acknowledge that the old things were once new things, right? And so those older new things that we're trying to focus on and pull in, we have a tendency to disregard anything that could potentially be new or old because it's no longer giving us that spark. It is entirely possible that in those moments where you felt like it's time for you're working with a deity and it's time for you to switch working with the deity, it's entirely possible that you're just working in the current of that deity so well that that deity hasn't needed to pop off for any reason, that you are literally stepping into the function of that deity in your everyday life, and you're not feeling the chills or the impressions or anything like that like we used to, because that's just normal for you now. So maybe take that moment and allow yourself to progress through it and acknowledge where you came from and where you're at. All right. I hope this was a good episode. I feel like I just kind of babbled and rambled. I tried to find the like questions and comments, and I think Mike already answered those. So we will be back with Mia and Mike on the next podcast episode. Mia will have some great astrological information. Mike will have the glyph. I might whip out a deck of cards. But today's was just some spell tips. So I hope you can take these spell tips and some of these ideas and concepts that I presented to you, and I hope that you can utilize them and they were helpful. If they were, drop some comments. If they weren't, drop some comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. Thank you so much, Saltines, for continuing to be loyal. Thank you so much, Saltines, for continuing to listen to us. Again, podcast episodes would be great. Please give us things, because we can sit and ramble and babble for forever, but having some direction of what you'd like to hear about is always, always, always welcome. So remember, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, And above all else, do your magic and do it well. Happy witching.